part of that. So we're going to talk about a serious topic today, burnout. I know as soon as Tim said burnout, you're all like, thank God, this is going to be exciting, wonderful, get the toys back out, or I'm going to need candy to get through this presentation. But we know it's a big deal. We know it's something that happens to a lot of people. So we're going to talk through it a little bit. I'm going to share some things with you, and we'll go ahead and dive into it here. So this is where we're going today. We're going to go through some definitions. What is moral distress? You may have heard that term before, coupled with burnout. What exactly is burnout? Because we talk about burnout a lot, but what is it really? We'll go through some studies and some stats, some examples of what moral distress looks like. And actually, I'm going to need your help for that part. So it's going to be, a lot of times somebody stands up here, asks a question, they don't actually want you to say anything. That part's going to be the opposite, where I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to actually need your help for that part. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. We'll talk about what's at stake. What if we don't work through burnout? What if we don't talk about burnout personally, but really important organizationally too, right? Then we're going to talk through two different pathways, the organizational path. What can an organization do? What can leaders do to prevent burnout? And then the personal path for me, if I'm burned out, what do I do? We'll have a review at the end and then some encouragement for the road. I do want to warn you ahead of time, this is a personal topic for me. This is not something that I've simply studied a lot of statistics on, and I'm going to just educate all of you so you can do it perfectly. You'll hear a little bit as we go on about what this has meant for me. To give you a little bit of a high-level view of where we're headed or how to think about what we're talking about, this is from researcher Amanda Rosen and her team, and I know it's a little hard to see, so I'll read through that. Where we start is with moral awareness. So chances are when you came to this job, you had a sense morally, so by morally I just mean deep inside of you, your inner held values, and you felt as though taking the job at the YMCA was going to be able to help you further those values. I'm going to help youth that are in trouble. I'm going to help take care of kids. I'm going to help with programming. I'm going to help with finances. I'm going to help with membership. I'm going to help with whatever. And those inner values for you, you took the job in part because you felt like you'd be able to further those values. Some people do take a job not thinking much about morals and values at all. You've worked with some of those people before, I'm sure, not at the YMCA, obviously, but at the previous jobs, you worked with somebody who really didn't care about anything, and you can kind of tell it. Here's the positive thing for those people that really don't care. They're not very likely to get burned out because they do not give a care. But for those of you who care deeply, that's the first step, unfortunately, to moral distress and to burnout. So I'm not telling you not to care deeply. In fact, I'm patting you on the back for caring deeply and having those values, but to be aware that that is what leads us down this progression. So when we have moral awareness, we have a sense of this is how I think things should go at work. We inevitably will experience moral distress. So a lot of you were nodding your heads when I said you took a job at the YMCA because of some sense of values and your value alignment with the YMCA. I don't know if this has happened yet for you. If you've been here for more than, a few minutes, it probably has. Sometimes things don't go the right way. The audible gasp of shock from some of you hearing that news. Sometimes the values that you hold inside of you aren't actually played out perfectly at work. You're going to experience moral distress. Moral distress is really unavoidable. If you have moral awareness, you will have moral distress. Now, having moral distress doesn't mean you're going to suffer and doesn't mean you're going to burn out, but it means you're experiencing this distance between you and those values. And then, obviously, it can go into moral injury, be a little bit more serious, and then get to burnout. So let's talk about moral distress. Moral distress is that gap between what your values are and what's happening at work. So a lot of you in here have been thinking about your frustration with your job or your frustration with your coworkers. Not that any of you told me that. I'm not ratting anybody out. Andrew walked in the room, so I don't want to name anybody, nobody actually said that, Andrew, just so you know. But we go to work, we have frustrations, right? That's the way it goes. And sometimes we have those frustrations because there's something that's happening that's crisscrossing our values. That we think this is the way things should go, and they're not going that way. Sometimes it's very sudden. It happens in one day. Something really bad happens, especially for a member or for somebody that you care about or a person on the team, and that can cause moral injury. or it's just something that happens like a dripping faucet, right? Over time, it bothers you, bothers you, bothers you, bothers you. And eventually that can cause that moral injury. So let's talk about burnout. 3 characteristics of burnout. So if you're wondering today if you're burned out, consider this list. And if these lists of 3 characteristics talk about how you're feeling, you might be burned out. It's not 100% sure, but it's a good possibility. First of all, if you're experiencing emotional exhaustion. By emotional exhaustion, I mean your exhaustion doesn't go away when you take a nap. Your exhaustion for work particularly doesn't go away when you take the weekend off. You take a vacation, and when you're coming back from vacation, you still feel tired about the work that you're doing. Emotional exhaustion tends to not be seasonal. There's a lot of teachers right now that are exhausted. Hopefully, by about July 4th, they'll kind of come back up for air. They'll be ready to go again, and then by the time we get to August and September, they'll really be ready. So it's seasonal, right? So that might not be burnout. It could be burnout, but it might not be because they're going to hopefully recover. Emotional exhaustion tends to be rather permanent. Second of all, depersonalization or cynicism. So depersonalization, when I don't feel like I'm really connecting as a human being any longer. Cynicism. When you see cynicism, maybe you think sarcasm and you're worried that I'm going to say you shouldn't be sarcastic. Don't worry. Sarcasm actually reveals truth, right? Sometimes when you're sarcastic about something, it helps people to see the real truth of what's going on. Cynicism, though, is at a soul level. When I'm cynical at a soul level, I don't think things are ever going to improve. I don't think anybody cares about this anymore. That's cynicism. So if you're experiencing that level, you might be burned out. And then last but not least, a low sense of really doing what you feel like you need to do at work. Like, I'm here to accomplish X, Y, and Z to move the needle on this, that, or the other thing, and I don't feel like I'm actually able to do that anymore. And again, important to differentiate between seasonally. You might feel that for a day, but if you feel that for a quarter, you feel that for a year, that you're not really making the difference you want to make, you might be burned out. So I describe burnout as when you remember being engaged and caring about your work, but it's not how you feel today. When you've run out of cares to give, when you're just not caring about what's going on any longer, you might be burned out. Here's some feelings. Some ways you might be feeling if you're burned out. You might feel trapped. This is a very hopeful message so far, isn't it? You're like, dang, toys, where's the candy and toys? Okay, let's get back to that. It'll get a little bit better, and then it'll get worse, and then it'll get better again. So you might be feeling trapped, hopeless. This is never going to get better. Overly sarcastic, like you're just going through the motions, like you're just doing the things. I'm clacking the email back to somebody. I'm answering the phone. I'm doing the thing, but I don't really feel that engaged with it any longer. It's hard to find good stats on your industry. Because what industry exactly would I research to be able to to pick up on all the things that the YMCA does? I certainly wasn't going to put in, are people who work at gyms burned out, because that would be like maybe a tiny sliver of what's represented for the YMCA. There's so many different things of what you do, but looking at this sort of comprehensive list that Gallup did a while back, a poll to see. The question here was, do you always or very often feel burned out at work? So a self-assessment of the people taking the survey. Unsurprisingly, K-12 educators. Anybody have a K-12 educator that lives with them at home? Okay, so you know that they're at the top of the list, and justifiably so. And we're not going to go into the reasons for that for K-12 as to why they're so far out front, but they are really far out front. But also really near the top is retail, which retail kind of surprised me at first. And then I thought, oh, they have to deal with what? People all the time. What does that sound like? The YMCA, right? Getting to deal with people all the time, right? People coming up to the desk, people complaining, people emailing, people showing up for classes. Hopefully, lots of great things too, but certainly you're dealing with the public all the time. And then there's an element of healthcare, of what you do to take care of the people that are coming through your doors. So I'd have to put these 3 together to say that I think burnout is a real risk for the YMCA. Let's talk about causes. Some of the main causes, you've got more work to do than you could possibly get done. or you're working more hours than you're really supposed to be working, or there's not a good barrier between work and not work. And so you feel like work reaches into not work all the time. This is a main cause of burnout. That goes hand in hand with feeling like I don't have any control. I can't control if my phone goes off. I can't control if that member is upset, those sorts of things. Lack of reward or recognition. Look, I was in ministry for a long time, and one thing you don't get into ministry for is the money. Well, there are some people getting into it for the money. That's a very different talk. It's not, there's no bright side of that talk. There's no good part of that talk. But the YMCA is similar, right? You don't say I want to serve at the Y because primarily of the massive amount of money I'm going to make. So reward and recognition can lead to burnout. Poor relationships, feeling like things aren't fair, aren't equitable, and then that values mismatch. If I feel like these are the things that are important to me, but I'm not being able to play those out at work. This came to my inbox this week. This is an ad or part of an ad for the University of Chicago Advent Health System. Large health systems or large companies are starting to figure out that people enter a company based on what the company can do for them. This is a change from my generation and above. We were taught to work hard and to be loyal to the corporation, that sort of thing. The younger generation, and spoiler alert, I actually think this is a positive change. It sounds like I'm giving the younger generation a hard time, but it's a positive change. They won't tolerate the request for loyalty, by and large, that my generation and above tolerated. Maybe because they watched how that worked out for their parents. And they can see this really sucked. This pulled dad away all the time. This pulled mom away all the time. They were always stressed. They didn't have energy when they came home from work. So maybe they're saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to live that lifestyle. And so this huge health system, this is their main graphic for a job event this week. The whole you belongs here. In other words, you can be a person when you're here. You're not just a cog in the system. And then their highlights, join us to learn about. What do they advertise? Not about the excellent care that you're going to provide. Hopefully you're going to provide excellent care at that health system, but it's about paid days off, health care, student loan repayment, tuition assistance, and opportunities. We're figuring out that, and the younger generation is helping us to figure out, that it's actually important to focus on what a job gives to the one who works it. But for those of us who have this overheated drive of responsibility, we've been paying the price for years, living that lifestyle instead of maybe it's time to learn from the younger people around us. All right, this is the part where I need your help. We're going to go through 3 possible examples of moral distress. So imagine for a second you work at the YMCA. I put your imagination caps on here. And you feel like the most important thing, and these 3 values, I'm not saying they should be or everybody's values or not. But imagine that for you, at your branch, at your location, your service line, you feel like safety is the number 1 priority. What might be something that could happen once, or something that's a repetitive concern that might conflict with this value? That's where that's a real question. I actually need your help. I don't work at the YMCA, so I don't have answers to this question. What might be something that could happen or once or repetitively? Okay. Yeah, for sure. And what might go through your head as you see that door is continually unlocked when it should be locked? You don't want to say that part. I understand. Frustration, right? Like, who's not locking this door? Don't they understand that it's really important that our facility's safe? Sure. What else might happen that would go contrary to your value if you felt like the number 1 value was safety at the YMCA? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. 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 So, so visibly, you're watching like this guy's about to go down, and this is not good. I think some people at your branch were like, "Yeah, we know who you're talking about." Yeah, for sure.
I'll give you a great example.
Yeah.
We talk about safety at the Y, but we don't have the appropriate staffing ratio for the
Hmm.
safety plan, right? We
Yeah.
say, hey, listen, we got to provide this good of service. Someone called off. We're going to move forward with it anyway, even though we know it's not best for our staff, best for the kids in our care. Right? Job's got to be done. We do the best that we can, but how are we addressing that so it happens less and less? That would be a great example of how we say safety is our number one priority, but we'll compromise when we have to.
Yeah.
That's
That's
a good
great.
example.
That's great. What else? What else could compromise this value?
Sometimes we're training our younger staff, like just the talk about risk management, things that could happen,
Mm-hmm.
or when we do drills, so safety is our number one
Mm.
priority. But then we're putting them like through emotional distress, and then sometimes we're not always even able to like address the trauma that they experience from knowing that something could happen on their watch,
Yeah.
right? And how they would have to respond to
Yeah.
it.
Just putting that in their brains, like this guy could go down, or the whole building could blow up, or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. And then part of what we're talking about is the matrix of values, right? Like it's important to provide services even if somebody calls off. But then it's maybe compromising our value of safety because we don't have as much staff as we really need. Or it's part of our value to make sure this guy who's might as well have been hit by a bus, which I hope no one ever has to say that about me. Like he might as well get hit by a bus. But you know, this guy, it's a value that he gets better, right? Like, and this is part of what he needs is to come. So it's that matrix of values for sure. Another one. Let's imagine, and I know this is a value for the YMCA, and depending on where you're at, maybe a very acute value. You have the value that all children ought to have an advocate, somebody watching out for them, and that they ought to be cared for. So we're moving a little bit away from physical safety now to emotional safety, spiritual safety. If this is a value that you hold, what might be something either at the Y or in the world that runs contrary to this value that could cause you stress? Barb?
When I hear a parent in the wellness center that they're trying to be uplifting to a child, but they're using language that's demeaning,
Okay. Wow.
that is competitive, and I think they might be trying to come from a good place, but it's really coming from, I think, a mean place.
Yeah.
They're sort of being a bully to the child to try to do them better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. Because you see maybe the emotional damage that that's causing, even though they're trying to inspire physical well-being. But
Yeah, I was working out about a month ago on a bike. It was real early in the morning, and I thought, gosh, I can't believe this young person is here at 5:30 in the morning. And the dad and he were together, and he wanted to have a competition
yeah,
with her on a rower and he on a bike, and he kept getting mad at her because the way she was reacting to him was, how a young girl would react. Like,
yeah, I have a 15-year-old daughter, so I can imagine. Yeah.
And he just kept getting more, escalated and escalated, and I just thought, just calm down, because
Yeah.
it's not working. She's not understanding the competition. She did what you wanted to do, but she didn't get what you wanted done.
Yeah.
And it just, she's never going to come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Not willingly. Yeah. What else? What else might run contrary to this value?
Coaches that are overly competitive and not really focusing on what the why value of sports is.
Yeah. They're all out for we got to win at all costs. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's really tough when you have to remove a child from a program for their safety or the safety of others.
Yeah. Yeah, so like the whole point of the program is to help that kid, and now because of things that have happened, you're having to say this is no longer accessible to you. Yeah, absolutely. All right, last one. We're going a little more personal here. I love the immediate laughter, then the intermediate, and then, okay, yeah. What could possibly happen that would run contrary to this value? Somebody calls off a shift, and you were supposed to be off, but now I'm coming in. There go all my plans, right? So I'm gonna come in. What else could happen that would violate this value for you? I feel like, I'm an adult. I ought to be able to take a day off, not be disturbed by work when I take that day off. What could happen?
Your work piles up.
Yeah, even if you take the day off. Yeah. So it doesn't feel restful because you know what's waiting for you when you get back. Yeah.
We have a 24/7 crisis line.
Yeah. You felt like that summed it up well enough. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So why do we, I love that was just enough to be said. Like, this exists. Yeah. Yeah. So why do we feel these things? It's because we're people. Because we're human beings. We value we value what we value. No one in here has an identical set of values to another person. So something might bother you deeply that doesn't bother somebody else as much because it's not one of their top 2 or 3 values. But you can identify those things by what really pisses you off. That's strong language for a Christian event. Sorry. Okay, it's okay. She said it's okay, so I may go further next. I see Andrew and Tim both look disapproving about that, but the. All right, I'm back in the box. I heard a boo over saying the PASS word, so I guess we're back in the box here. Those things that make us really upset is how we can tell that those are things that are important to us, right? Makes us really upset to see X, Y, and Z. Okay, that must be a value of mine. And when those things are crisscrossed or violated like that, we feel that tension because we're people and we have these values. This might be the only thing you remember from the talk, and I hope that if you do remember just one thing, I hope you remember what this slide says and what I'm about to say to you. Moral distress is not your fault. If you are burned out, it's probably because you care. It's probably because you've given so much. And you've worked under a rubric of the more I give, that's evidence of how much I care. I'm going to question whether or not you should continue to live with that mindset, but it's come from a good, big-hearted, caring place. So moral distress and burnout happen to good people who want to do good work, who are put into difficult situations over and over and over. I mean, for an example that's outside of what you do right now, think of our K-12 teachers. Why are they burned out? Because they care about the kids. They care about the kids, and then these things happen, and systems happen, and they can't do the things they feel like they'd like to do for the kids. Well, it's the same way at the YMCA. There's things you want to do for your members or for your mission, and when things get in the way, especially when they get in the way repetitively, you have this experience of moral distress and burnout. I've never had this slide in a deck until today. So a lot of the other slides I've talked about in other groups. I think this is an important question for us to consider, particularly with a mission-based organization like the YMCA. And I recognize it's not actually a fair dichotomy, but it wouldn't be any fun if there wasn't an unfair dichotomy every once in a while, right? Which is more important, the mission or the missionaries?
Do you want real answers?
No, I would prefer fake answers as much as possible.
The third option, then.
The third option. No, you can't do a third option because that's no fun for me.
I would like to nominate the missionaries then.
As being more important.
If there's no one to further the mission, then it doesn't really matter what the mission is.
Yeah. Okay. Agree? Disagree?
I think that can be hard when the mission is also people.
Hmm.
We're here to help people, so when the mission is also people, which people are more important to focus on people.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's put it, sometimes it's easier to see when you look at it in a different industry. Imagine the world I come from, other than faith-based, is healthcare. So imagine that a nurse has a patient who tries to hit her. What is the mission in healthcare in general, not necessarily just specific to a patient violence situation, but in general, what's the nurse's mission? To care for the patient. What becomes more important when she walks into a room and this guy is trying to hit her? Her safety. Why? She can't care for him if she's injured. In fact, not only can she not care for him, she can't care for the other 5 patients that she's taking care of. She can't come back tomorrow and care for the other 5 patients that she's going to take care of tomorrow. And so I think sometimes it's easier to see, like I said, when we look at what somebody else is doing. So we would say in that scenario, the missionary, the nurse or the teacher or the YMCA coworker has value above the mission. Now that's not necessarily what most of us have been taught or have taught. I'll raise my hand of what I've taught over the years. We sacrifice ourselves for the mission, whether that mission is church, whether that mission is healthcare, whether that mission is the YMCA, that we sacrifice ourselves for that. Let's go just a little bit deeper. I'm not sure if this is going to make people mad or not, so we'll just advance the slide and figure out. Was Jesus' mission to atone for the sins of the world and to reconcile the world to God more important? Or the person of Jesus more important?
I would argue that
He's arguing inside his own brain before he can get it out. Okay. Say that last part. Is it?
it was integral to who.
Okay. So he wouldn't have been Jesus without fulfilling the mission. Were there days that Jesus wasn't working on the mission?
Oh, he wasn't.
When he wasn't working on the mission? Yeah, probably. Did Jesus lack value that day? Now we're really hitting home, right? If Jesus took a PTO day, should Peter have been allowed to call him? And how did Jesus respond when he got that phone call? Does Jesus use do not disturb? That's why he sends the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit's the 24/7 crisis hotline. Never gets a day off. The Holy Spirit's always working. Dang it. You don't want to be that part of the Trinity. That stinks. Stinks. I think God's the one that got off the easiest. God the Father's got some. God the Father stored up his PTO days for millennia to be able to take them off later. But let's be serious about it. Were there days that Jesus wasn't working to further his mission? It would seem so. Maybe the first 30 years of his life, for example.
I think he was kind of made for this, though. Like, his whole purpose was
Oh.
to do all that. So it's like
Yeah.
everything that he was for the mission.
Yeah, so let's go there for us. 100% Jesus, right? Now let's go there for us. Were you made for this? Is this your calling, and therefore it's integral to who you are to be a YMCA coworker? Do not answer that out loud, especially if your leader is nearby. Do not answer that question out loud. But remember where I came from, ministry. What do we say about ministry? Always. We say it about a lot of things, but always, it's my calling. I am ordained by God to do this work. This is a part of who I am as a human being. God has called me to be a minister. And I think that there's a lot of fairness to that, but there's a lot of pressure, right? If this is integral to who I am. Okay, other thoughts? More important, Jesus or Jesus' mission? Did Jesus, let's ask it seriously. Did Jesus ever take time off? What do you think? Well, he lived 2,000 years ago. There's probably a lot of things that aren't like exactly like we do. But did he take rest? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Jesus almost certainly sought balance. And
Yeah.
balance is work and ourselves, right? We have to seek that. And so the PTO is not a break from commitment, it's a part of it.
Yeah.
So that we can become better in order to deliver his will.
Yeah. If you read Jesus' life, looking for times that he unplugged, you will find them. Absolutely. You'll find him pulling away from a crowd. You'll find him being in grief about John the Baptist's death, somebody he cared about very deeply, and saying, I need to step away from the crowds for a while. You'll find people driving him literally. Okay, you felt like you were driven to the edge of a cliff before at work. People literally brought Jesus to the edge of the cliff and said, we're going to make you our king. And Jesus said, no. And he walks through the crowd. He pulls away. He allows, now eventually comes and saves the guys in the middle of the storm on the sea. But for a while, he's like, seriously? I'm trying to be up here praying and taking some time off, and he waits. In fact, Jesus waits repetitively. He waits to come to see Lazarus, even though Lazarus died. He takes that time. Do we understand fully why? There are lots of different theological arguments about why Jesus waited, but the point is he did wait. Jesus, at least 9 times in the Gospels, separates himself from the daily work of what we see him doing the rest of the time. In fact, even before he goes to the cross, where does he go? How many times have you thought, you know what I should just do is just go to a garden and pray? You know, like that's sort of a fantasy sometimes, right? When you're thinking about the stress of life and everything. I just want to go be alone in a garden and pray. Guess what Jesus did before he went to the cross? He went to a garden. He even got away from his closest friends, got over by himself, got quiet, and prayed. So there was, I think, if I'm reading it right, there was a prioritization for Jesus even of his own soul. Was his mission to save every soul? Yes. Was there also daily prioritization of his own soul? Remember when his brothers, these are parts of the scriptures we don't pay attention to. Remember when his brothers were like, man, if you really want to get seen, you need to go down to Jerusalem and go to the Passover. And what does Jesus say? It's fine for you to go whenever you want to go. I'm not going. Because he recognized what it would mean for him to go. And then, of course, later he went in disguise, which is just a really cool thing to think about, Jesus going in disguise, like so people don't see him when he goes down there. But he drew that boundary. So the stakes, let's get back to burnout. The stakes are really high. What if we don't address these things? People quit, right? I'm sure that if I asked you if you knew somebody who was burned out and they quit their job because they were burned out, you'd be able to name somebody. Maybe a long list of somebody that quit because they were burned out. The stakes are high because of what Andrew said. You know, if we don't have enough staffing, then that begins to call into question our ability to carry out our mission. Not just safety, but the whole YMCA mission can lead to disengagement. So even when the coworkers are there, maybe they're not really there, right? Because they're burned out, they're experiencing these things. Qualitatively, coworkers being disengaged, not feeling the same level of empathy that they would otherwise, errors. It's harder to pay attention at work when you're burned out, when you're stressed out. PTSD is a real thing, depression, absenteeism, and sadly, suicide. It is, if you say it out loud in a vacuum, there are people dying by suicide because of how much their jobs stress them out. That's insane. And I don't mean that that person who made that choice is insane. I mean that the system that we've accepted as the way that we think about work and the way that we do work is obviously insane because of the sort of ramifications it's having for some people. And I'm sorry for those of you who might know someone who's fallen into this category or been close to this edge themselves. So let's talk about 2 paths. First, the organizational path. So you all are leaders in this room, whether your title looks like a leader's or not, and I think most of yours probably do, but you are full-time staff of a large organization that has a lot of part-time staff. So by the nature that you're not, just going in and doing 2 or 3 fitness classes a week. You are a leader. So as a leader and as the organization, what can be done to help others avoid burnout? And then we're going to come back to personally, how do we recover? The first thing is sometimes we need to let people opt out. If they're facing something, if they're the person who's sitting at the wellness counter watching this guy just about eat it every single time he's on the treadmill, and you can see like day in and day out, this is super stressful. Maybe as a leader, you step over and be like, hey, you wanna maybe take the break now and like step away and just opt out? That's a powerful message to that person to say, I see your values, I see that this is stressful for you, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to step away. Can we always do that? Of course not. But when we can do that, it sends a message that I care more about you than I do about the job that you're doing. Second of all, when we can't avoid it, sometimes it's good to take a time out to say, let's take a time out and talk about what happened. Let's talk about how stressful this was. Let's talk about why this happened. And so this isn't just a debrief to figure out how do we get to a root cause analysis, but this is let's honor and respect that this was hard. I know because I've been occasionally on the hospital side of hard things that have happened at the YMCA. I know that you have daily stressors and you have big things that happen at the YMCA that are really hard. As leaders, taking just a minute to say, let's just take a second to stop doing the busy work that we're doing and recognize that what just happened was really difficult. Can be a powerful way to help your coworkers avoid burnout. This is the number one thing. If you're going to take any tool away as a leader of what you can do to help other people, this is the one I want you to walk away with. Leaders who listen. And if you question whether or not this would be really powerful, then you've never had a leader who didn't listen. If you've had a leader who didn't listen, especially if you've had that leader for a long time in the past, obviously, again, with a different organization, not the YMCA, but you were someplace where somebody couldn't really hear what you were saying, couldn't really hear what was important to you, you know how distressing that was. I was talking with a healthcare coworker that I coach for Burnout recently, and I said, she's in a situation where she's not received support. She's not had a leader who's listened. And I said, healthcare. This is a little bit like if a mom comes in and her baby dies. It's going to be traumatic one way or the other. But if her baby dies and she has support, she's going to have a little different experience than if her baby dies and she has no support. And by support, I mean the coworkers, programs, systems, family, etc. If she has that support, she's going to have a different outcome most of the time than if she doesn't. And this is a parallel. And when I said that to her and she realized that what she was dealing with, although certainly not a death and something that profound, she was experiencing burnout without support. She realized why it had been so difficult. So as a leader, you listening, even if there's nothing you can do, and that's so frustrating, right? When you're a leader, when you hear it, you're like, you're so right. This is not the way it should be. I can't do anything about it. Because sometimes the system is just the way it is. I used to think there was somebody at the top of the system just messing it up for everybody else. Turns out there's not. It's just the way things go sometimes, unfortunately. And can there be changes to be made? Of course, but a lot of times it's just the way things are. But if you feel, and imagine you've been in that spot before where you're frustrated about something, and you go to your leader and she or he hears you out, you leave feeling better. Even if the problem wasn't solved, even if it's going to happen again tomorrow. Well-being programs. Today is a well-being program, right? You're being invested into, but this is the thing about well-being programs. If we give you this great session on burnout and then say, go back to working 80 hours a week, always answering your phone, we're going to cut your pay, and we're not going to listen to you ever again, the talk was sort of worthless at that point, right? So the well-being program, I always say, is kind of like a parachute. We notice when they're not in place. So like if we don't have something to invest in the well-being of our coworkers, that's a signal to our coworkers that they're not really cared about. It's not necessarily going to solve the problem, but it's something that can show that we care. These next two go together. We've got to have ways for people to say, this is going wrong and it needs to be fixed. I love a system that does that, so that you don't have to have a face-to-face conversation every time something's going wrong. Obviously, a face-to-face conversation might be much more productive, but people can be very intimidated to come to their leader and say, this is going wrong all the time and it needs to be fixed. So having a system where you can anonymously say, this is what's going on, not just a gripe line, not a 24/7 gripe line, hopefully, but to be able to say this is something that's going wrong is very important for people to feel as though they have that accessibility. And then next to say, I'm struggling. Oh, I did them in reverse order. Sorry about that. So back to 5. For people to say that they're struggling in the same way that we would report an error, to be able to say, I'm not in a good place and I need help and I need to step aside for a while, or I need some extra support without fear of being in trouble. And then last but not least, you know how important this one is, peer support. Having people around you that care about you, you look forward to seeing, having that connection. Whether it's formal or informal, this can go a long way in mitigating the effects. You might still have moral distress, right? You're still going to feel like, there's still some things happening here that I wish weren't that way. I wish this guy wasn't about to fall. I wish the building was locked down. I wish that the parents wouldn't talk to the kids this way. But when you've got other coworkers to be able to shoulder that burden with, then it's easier to tolerate. It doesn't go away, but it becomes easier. Let's talk about on-call. Let's talk about getting calls from work when you're not at work. So for 10 years, I was on call for Parkview 24/7. And the problem was, anytime I wanted to complain about it, I realized that it was actually life or death that I was getting phone calls about. So I couldn't say, it's not life or death, because my chaplaincy team responded to every patient death in the hospital. So usually, it actually was about life or death, which meant I could not complain, which is kind of one of the worst things could ever happen to you, is not being able to complain about something. So for 10 years, I'm getting phone calls, 2 o'clock in the morning, on weekends. These are some of the places. My favorite place, or my most frequent place to take these calls, was in my bathroom. Because 2 o'clock in the morning, where else are you going to go? You're going to step out of your bedroom and into the bathroom to take that phone call. My kids' events, rugby matches at my kids' schools, band concerts going on. I'm taking phone calls in the hallway. Colts games, go Colts. Go Colts. Wow. I heard somebody say Bears louder than the Colts cheered. I know it's been a tough few years, but we're gonna get there. Yeah, we're gonna harness that Anthony Richardson plus Caitlin Clark plus Tyrese Halliburton energy in Indianapolis, and it's just gonna go up from here. None of you actually believe that, because nobody's like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, nobody said anything. Okay, well, remains to be seen, I guess. One time we pulled up to the beach on vacation, and my phone rang, and I answered it. And if you had to imagine the worst possible place and time to ever take a call for work, I want you to imagine some of those things, because you might actually be able to guess where I took a call. Say again?
Your wife's delivery.
My wife's delivery? Fortunately, all my kids were born before I started this job. Or otherwise, you never know. A wedding? You're on the right, kind of on the right path there. Think of a place particularly.
When you're already at work.
Yeah, that's kind of a double-edged sword there. You're already at work and you're getting a phone call. I feel ashamed because of the noise you just made when I put that up on the slide. I already felt ashamed about it, but then you're all like, that's disgusting. Would understand up again. But no joke, in the shadow, and we were literally not just at Disney World, but in the shadow of Cinderella's castle, my phone went off and I took a work phone call. And all of you would be like, either I get it, or this guy is the biggest deadbeat dad and loser I could ever. Why did we hire this guy to come and talk to us about burnout? Obviously, this is why he's burned out. So a little bit about my story. So for 10 years, was on call in this way. Very valuable work that I enjoyed, work that I loved, work that I was engaged in, work that I believed in the mission, obviously, of what we were trying to do, et cetera, et cetera. But in the 2.5 years of the pandemic, so from March 2020 until October 2022, my team responded to 5,563 patient deaths. And to say that's heavy would be an understatement. Leadership conflict ensued. We were all being squeezed, and so some of that leadership conflict, of course, was my fault. Taking meetings on weekends, disruption of family life, personal life. I don't know if any of you had to do this, but when the world was changing in 2020, I just couldn't watch social media stuff anymore, and so I disconnected from there. My generation loves Facebook, but I got off of Facebook and said goodbye. Could not see those things anymore, which only increased my experience of isolation. This is my 44th birthday. You can see Aiden and I there, and 3 of our 4 kids there. Kristen took the picture. Don't you love those green jeans? Is that nice? That's nice. Yeah. I see only men saying yes, which is a bad sign. Bad sign. My daughter said not to wear them. As you can tell, she's a little more stylish than I am, but she's embarrassed that I show this picture. But this is us going to lunch on my 44th birthday about a year and a half ago. But this is also me on my 44th birthday later that afternoon. So I knew when I got up that morning something wasn't quite right inside of me, but I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. So, of course, we did what you do. We went out to lunch at Casa Grande and had quesadillas and had a good time. But I knew my heart was doing something strange, and late that afternoon, my watch sort of alerted me to what it was, that my heart was in AFib, which means it was not in its normal rhythm. And it had persisted since I got up that morning. So it had been going on for 8, 9, 10 hours at that point. And honestly, I work in healthcare, but I'm not a clinical person, so I didn't know how serious this is or isn't. And so we made our way over to the hospital. And I think doctors really like it when you say, we actually don't need a diagnosis, because my Apple Watch took care of that earlier today. So I'm going to let you know this is what's going on. And he kind of rolled his eyes, yeah, okay. But the EKG, of course, agreed with the Apple Watch that my heart was consistently out of rhythm. And so he sat down in the chair next to me and leaned over. He said, what we do for people like you in this situation is we cardiovert you. And again, healthcare, but not a clinical person. So I said, what does that mean? He said, we're going to shock you. And I thought it was a joke, because I was awake, I was alert, talking. I wasn't experiencing anything other than feeling the AFib. I said, is that a joke? And he said, no, it's not a joke. And he said, so what we usually do in this situation, we'll sedate you, we'll float you along, and then we're going to hook up they don't do the paddles, I guess, anymore. They do like I know it's disappointing, but they did like a sticky patch in the front, then we're going to do a sticky patch on the back, and then we're going to let the computer decide when to shoot 225 joules through your chest. And I said, tell me about the sedation part. Is that necessary? And he said, no one has ever asked me that before. And he kind of looked at me like I was an idiot. He said, you probably take phone calls at Disney World from work, don't you? I was like, yeah, I do. Sorry. Oh, yeah. I was the chairperson of the ethics committee. And fortunately or unfortunately, everybody knew who I was. I'm on the TVs at Parkview, on stages at Parkview all the time. So he knew who I was, and the other coworkers in the area knew who I was. Several of my coworkers had already come down and visited me, so that anybody who didn't know who I was, when they saw the other people that they knew come down, they knew who I was. And I said, I think I would like to try it without the sedation. And he said, well, I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend that you take the sedation. People don't usually want to remember when they're shocked with 225 joules. I said, well, how many times do you get shocked with 225 joules of electricity? I want to remember it. I want to remember that happening. That's something I could talk about at a retreat for the YMCA coworkers a year and a half from now. So let's go ahead and do it without sedation. So I knew I was in trouble when the respiratory therapist seemed nervous, the nurse seemed nervous, but we went ahead, did that cardioversion without sedation. In fact, here's the tape to prove it. So he said 225 joules. The readout, I think, says 255 joules. So apparently he was like, well, if he's going to be awake, let's just juice him up a little bit more. Lots of coworkers came in the room. If you don't know, when you're in the ER, if you get ignored, that's a good thing, because it means you're not about to die. It's when your room fills up with clinical workers that you have to actually be nervous. So the room filled up with clinical workers. They shocked me, and I think some of them were there just to watch the chairperson of the ethics committee get shocked, to be honest. and more so than because they were going to do anything for me if anything happened. But as you could see, then my heart returned to a normal heartbeat after that. But that wasn't the end of the story, of course. A few weeks later, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety for the first time in my life. And I know that on a certain level, I'm fortunate to make it to 44 years old without a mental health diagnosis. Not a lot of people get that opportunity. But I also know that all of us should pay attention when something happens for the first time in our lives. So within a few weeks, my heart had gone out of rhythm, and I'd been diagnosed with some mental health concerns. So burnout had really taken its toll. And then for me, in my role, because I had always been all about the mission that we had served and all of that, my role and my sense of identity really came into question. I'm an ordained pastor. I shouldn't struggle with anxiety and depression. I'm, a capable leader. I should be able to continue doing my job at work with excellence and carrying on our mission, etc. I'm the ethics chairperson. I'm a person who's always helpful, not one who's in need of help from others. And so the work that I enjoyed for so long was killing me. And I didn't realize how literally until that September, October, how much that was happening. So let's talk a little bit about how to recover, because this is something I've had to do. And it wasn't easy, and it's still in process for sure, but a year and a half into it, it's a very different place than it was in the fall of 2022. This is actually the part people don't talk about much. People like to talk about what organizations should do to prevent burnout. They like to talk about what leaders should do or stop doing because you're causing other people to be burned out, but we don't talk a lot about what we need to do for ourselves. So let's do that. Before you can get on your own personal path to recovery, you have to identify these things. You have to be able to say, going back to the slides we looked at earlier, those characteristics of burnout are on display in my life, and therefore I need to acknowledge that. I need to say, this is where I'm at. Moral distress is happening for me, and the repercussion is burnout. And then I describe as options instead of as steps, like I did for the organizational path. So option number 1. Adjust the expectations you have of yourself. Because we'd love to blame it on work and our boss, but a lot of times, where does it come from? It comes from inside of us. It might also come from work and our boss, but a lot of times it lives with us. And you know this is the case because people will get burned out at one job and go to another, and what happens? They get burned out there too, because they have these really high expectations of themselves, and they sort of lose themselves in their work, and it has that toll. So ask yourself this question. If I sat down with somebody that's doing what I'm doing at work and they describe to me the expectations they have, would I say, sounds reasonable? Or would I say, what is wrong with you? Why are you having this level of expectations of yourself? To take a close look at that and say, do I need to make any adjustments to my own expectations? And this is hard to do. If you've been very focused and very intense at work for a long time, you may have to decrease that focus and intensity. Does that mean you need to decrease your productivity? I actually think it's quite the opposite. I think that when you decrease that intensity and you become healthier on the inside, you're actually more productive for the YMCA when you're there. But it's hard to live in that because it feels counterintuitive a lot of the time. But when you decrease your focus, decrease your intensity, in the middle of my burnout, I had a session with my therapist, and she said, the problem isn't the job, the problem is the intensity. And so if you go to another job and you replicate this intensity, you will replicate your problems. And so that's when you realize it's things that are happening inside of me. Give attention to your nervous system. Does anybody in here do nervous system exercises? I hope that somebody does, because am I the only one who does nervous system exercises? I'm the needy person. Okay, good. At least, thank you. I know you're lying and you don't actually do them, but I appreciate it. Yeah, shake the hands. You're flipping yourself. Yeah, I said flipping yourself. That's not what I meant. I mean like you're flipping your arms around yourself. We're going to do one together right now. So the rest of you can say, yes, I've practiced the nervous system exercise. So I want you to free your hands up. If you have glasses on, I want you to take those glasses off. I'm going to do the best I can with the microphone on here. So I want you to take your middle fingers on both your hands, place them on that thin spot below your eyes where your bone is, and gently press and make about 8 circles right there. And then once you've made those 8 circles, you're going to slide up to your temple, This is the motion you make when you're really stressed out at work, right? Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. You're going to do 8 circles there, and now you're going to slide those fingers to the inside between your eyes, just above the bridge of your nose where that thin spot of skin is over your bone, and make 8 pressures there, and then you're going to slide back and do the process over again back to the temples for 8 times, 8 circles. And then you're going to go down below your eye for 8 circles. Continue that for just a second while you listen to a thought. To do this is important and valuable, but to also to recognize that you actually have a nervous system in your body that might be living in fight or flight all the time, and might be causing impacts for your stress level constantly. Living in that recognition and having some mindfulness of your nervous system is just as important, if not more important, than doing exercises like this. Did anybody fall asleep on me while we were doing that? Does anybody feel a little something from doing that? I mean, it's not going to change your life in one thing, but do you feel a little something from doing that? And how would you describe it, if so? Calm. See, our nervous system was built to keep us safe from saber-toothed tigers, right? Or bears in the woods or something, or somebody going to hunt us. The problem is that now we have the same cortisol response to emails. Or that person walking into the office, or that situation. Or sometimes, if it goes on long enough, we have that response just from driving to our office, or from logging onto our computer, and our brain says, danger, 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 this is happening. And when we live like that for long enough, our body can't ever switch off into that rest. It's always in that fight or flight. Make a bucket list. I'm over on time by just a little bit. Am I okay to go about 5 more minutes or no? Okay, Tabitha. Why am I looking at Tim? This is the authority down here. Yeah, come on now. Yes. Tim was going to say no, so I'm glad I looked to you and said yes. Make a bucket list. How many of you have a written or recorded bucket list somewhere? A few of you. Okay, great. So why I'm going to recommend a bucket list for you if you're burned out is because we do get lost. Our own desires get lost in the process of working and doing what we do on a daily basis. So we can lose ourselves and our own desires when we're burned out. When we make a bucket list, we say, you know what, there's actually stuff I want to do in the world that's not just what I feel like I'm supposed to do for work. And it affirms that, and it says I'm a valuable human being that might want to do some of these things, and I can go and do those things. So I made mine during this season when I was going through a hard time, and I have been working on it. It's actually been a ton of fun, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to have a little bit of a window into my bucket list. This is from the Bucket List Journal, which is by Ben Nemtin. I'm not going to go into that, but it's a nice resource if you're not quite sure where to start for a bucket list. He encourages us to make a list of 100 bucket list items, which I haven't done to 100 yet, but I've gotten to 81. And I'm gonna let you call out a number, and I'll tell you what I've got. It has to be between 1 and 81. If I've done that, 69, come on. As if I don't have young men in my home already. Let me guess, you want 420 next, right? Doesn't go that high, sorry. I know 420 is coming up tomorrow, that's great. Sheesh. We've gone over. I feel really bad that 69 is a seriously boring one. It's pay off my car. That's like so pedestrian compared to the excitement out there. Okay, give me another one. One. What was the very first one? See an event at the Rose Bowl Stadium. I don't care what event. I'm not a USC fan, but I'd love to go to the Rose Bowl and see that there. What else? 24. Oh, and by the way, I have not done those two yet. Those are still on the list. What was it? 24. I don't want to say this one out loud from my son because he'll tell my wife, and then I'll have to actually do it. Take a dance lesson with my wife. I don't actually want to do that, but this is how I dance. So we did it once in college, and we haven't done it again since. All right, have not done that. It's come to a Zoom close. Would that count? Okay. All right, I'll check that one off. Give me another. Let's get to one I've actually checked off. We got one already. That was the Rose Bowl Stadium. Thanks for paying attention, though. Jeez. Yeah. Just teasing. Give me another one or two.
13.
13. Get passports for everyone in our family. So that's not checked off yet, but we have one left. There's 6 of us. 5 of us have passports. Our college son is coming home soon. He actually has some opportunity to travel overseas, so he'll be getting his passport soon. So I only go to 81. I haven't been good enough to get to 100 yet. So 81 is get a pellet. 81. So going back to my wife was a spin instructor at the Y. Get a Peloton bike for my wife at home, and we checked it off just 2 months ago. It's awesome. She loves it. She loves it. But you see the energy that gives. That's like the. I don't know how to quantify it, but that's like the opposite energy of what burnout energy feels like. Like this is something I want to do, and so I'm going to go after. I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to experience that thing. All right, personal path option number 5, draw boundaries. Easier said than done, right? This is a whole lesson. Nedra Tawwab, this is an online creator and author. If you really, really struggle with boundaries, Nedra Tawwab, I can't tell you how to spell it, but I think it's pretty close to how it sounds. Fantastic content on boundaries. Eliminating energy suckers, what is really to say this sucks my energy, and then to ask yourself the question, do I actually have to keep doing it, or can I step away from doing that thing that's sucking my energy so much? Mantras, developing mantras. I'm sure some of you have mantras that you work with that help keep you calm. So mine during all of this was things can change at any time. And I'm actually going to have you repeat that one with me. Ready? We're going to say it together. Things can change at any time. So if you're in a stressed out place, you're burned out, just remember that things can change at any time. They might get a lot worse. I don't know. But they're going to change. Things are going to change at some point. And then finally, before we close, just confiding in 1 or 2 trusted people. This is the mistake. We make the mistake on either end of the spectrum. We either tell no one how stressed out we are, or we just blab it all over everybody. And every time I show up to work, I'm like, I can't believe that blah, 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 blah. This is so, it's like, okay, I've got my 2.5 hours of complaining and now I can get to work. We do one or the other when really we need to find that middle ground, find 1 or 2 trusted people, a counselor, a friend, a pastor, a family member, somebody we can sit down with and say, I know everybody's stressed at work, but I think it's impacting me a little differently right now, and I need to talk through that with somebody. Okay, if you have your phones with you, if you pull those out, I'm going to have a QR code up on the screen in just a second. This is going to give you an opportunity to tell me if I sucked as a speaker today. So I know some of you love that direct feedback, so you're going to have that opportunity. But you're also going to get an email with a PDF that's going to contain the overview of the organizational path for you to think about as a leader, and then the personal recovery path for you to think about as an individual too. So when that comes up, it should come up to a purple Google form. If you end up on something that says, betusa.com or something like that, you won't go away from that, but it should come up with that Google form. Take you maybe about 1 minute to fill that out, and then we'll draw to a close.
While everyone's completing their surveys, we just had a little token of
Oh,
our
thank you.
appreciation.
Thank you.
So thank you for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you, Angie. These guys are great. So I do some executive coaching. If it's something that you need, you realize this is a point I'm at right now. I need that sort of coaching. Just started that recently with some new clients. And this helps you to kind of develop a burnout-proof plan for your leadership, your organization, to help you really thrive in your career and help you feel seen and whole and healthy and avoid that personal burnout. But the last thing I want to say to you guys is no matter what stress you're under at work, no matter how burned out you may feel, no matter how much you may be like, this is just taking it out of me and I feel sort of dehumanized. Remember that was one of the points we talked about, that none of that actually decreases how much you're worth. None of that takes away from your personal dignity. And here's the really crazy news. At some point, and I have to say this quietly, you're not going to work this job forever. At some point, you're going to not work this job anymore. And that will actually not decrease your value in God's eyes, in the eyes of people who really care about you. Your value, your dignity as a human being is not actually tied to your productivity. Productivity matters. We want to do things that are good for the world and good for people. But the two are not connected. Your value, your intrinsic worth, your God-given God-likeness is unchanged whether you're feeling great about everything at work or you're about ready to throw in the towel. Thank you guys so much for participating today, jumping in with me.